I guess the one conspiracy theory, I mean, it's not a conspiracy theory, but I guess the one point that you make, I agree with this point, by the way. But when you claim that Bush intentionally let Bin Laden escape to Pakistan at Tora Bora,
And I do admit that
using
that's a circumstantial case, a speculative case, but a pretty good one, I think.
no, I think it's a really good one. And the only defense that I hear, I was listening to, I think Michael Scheuer on like an old episode of probably like 10 years ago or so, and you were asking him about it, and his defense was he was like, did they let him go? And he's like, no, it's all the lawyers. It's just the lawyers, and all these decisions are made by law, and that's it. And I feel like you would be kind of blunt about that, but I feel that's kind of the defense of a lot of weird, complicated things. Like, oh, it's just the lawyers in Washington. Like that's why our foreign policy, or that's why we couldn't do that. That's why we let Bin Laden escape to Pakistan when we had the military assets to capture him, or at the very least riddle him with bullets.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly a plausible deniability kind of thing where you plug that in wherever you want. But look, these men at that time, George Bush and Dick Cheney and Donald Rumsfeld and George Tenet, they were canceling every law in the book. They were canceling the whole Constitution in the name of the Commander-in-Chief Clause. Overrides all. This president can torture people to death. And there's no law, there's no treaty, there's no part of the Constitution that can stop him from doing it. That was their theory at the time. And then they say, oh, yeah, no, some Air Force JAG said we couldn't kill the greatest enemy this country's had since Tojo. Come on. It's David Addington. Is that the lawyer we're talking about? Dick Cheney's man said we can't do it. I don't believe that. Some lawyer at the Pentagon said that. Well, why didn't they ask David Addington? David Addington says we could torture people to death. David Addington says the president of the United States can do anything. So, and then they hide behind, well, we didn't want to stir up some Pakistani tribal chiefs or whatever. Well, why the hell not? I'm supposed to believe they cared about that. And see, here's the thing, man. In a way, there's something to it. Where like once a decision has been made, now you're innocent for going along with it. So they had decided on a strategy, which, come on, man, this is wink nudge BS. But they had decided officially to focus on the Taliban and regime change. And that getting Al-Qaeda was important too. But as Bush said, hey, as long as bin Laden's on the run, then that's good enough for me. That's not the mission. Getting bin Laden was not the mission. In fact, I wish I'd had this quote in the book. I only recently saw it. It's in the movie 9/11 Press for Truth. There's a clip of the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Richard Myers, saying the goal was never to get bin Laden. And I have a quote from, that's a direct quote from Meet the Press. And there's a thing from this last, I guess, February, it could be January still, in reaction to the January 6th riot at the Capitol. NPR News interviewed Robert Grenier. Who's Robert Grenier? Was a former CIA officer who used to be the station chief in Islamabad. And part of my case for them deliberately letting Osama bin Laden go is that Robert Grenier had already worked out deconfliction with the Pakistani Army and Frontier Corps, that when bin Laden, when and if he flees across the border into Pakistan, and we expect the Delta Force to be hot on his heels, that we want to protect from friendly fire. So we have a deconfliction line already set up. Robert Grenier, at least in his book, he claims he had done his job and had set up a deconfliction line. And then he makes excuses for bin Laden getting away. Well, I don't know. He took the wrong valley or some kind of thing. I forgot his excuse. He doesn't buy in the book that they let him get away either. But he's, to me, part of the case that they did, if you take his word for it on that. But anyway, so this same guy, who in other words had this peripheral role in the hunt for bin Laden at the time, he is interviewed on NPR News about January 6th. And he's making this horrible analogy, and we'll get to the analogy in a second. But to set up for the analogy, he explains to the NPR news reporter, he says, you know, in the war on terrorism, we could have focused directly on bin Laden and Al-Qaeda. But he doesn't use the word wisely, but he's clearly like agreeing that this was the smart thing to do, the way he describes it. And he says, but we decided we wanted to focus more on kind of this broader milieu of extremism in which Al-Qaeda was thriving. And that meant the Taliban. Well, this is the parentheses for the sake of our discussion. In his analogy, the January 6th rioters were Al-Qaeda. And the broader milieu of the Taliban that they want to focus on, that are the real enemy of the new domestic war on terrorism, well, that's just the American right wing. That's everybody to the right of the center, is the Taliban. And, this is the mindset of these freaks in Washington, D.C. But anyway, go back to set up for the analogy. We could have gone after the guilty. This organization of 400 Arab, Saudis, and Egyptians hiding in Afghanistan, bin Laden and his closest friends and associates and their bodyguards and hangers-on, Chechen militiamen or whatever. And we could have just flattened them flat. But we didn't want to do that. We wanted to go after the Taliban in Kabul. And they'll just tell you. So in other words, maybe where I go wrong in the book is I sort of imply, or I don't fill in the space correctly. And so it sort of seems like I'm saying like they had this whisper conversation. Like, oh, let's let them go. But it's more like, no, they said, look, getting bin Laden's not the goal. Right, everybody? Right. So then now it's not like a secret weird conspiracy, right? This is the policy that they decided. And so much of this is in Bob Woodward's book, Bush at War. And, Bush told the White House staff, give everything to Bob, good old Bob, court historian, Washington Post guy. We like him. We trust him. And who wants to go through the trouble of deciding what to tell him? Just give him everything. And everybody has permission to talk to him. So we got all kinds of interviews with these kooks. Of course, they're all pointing the fingers at each other, but which is fine. And there's some honesty and some dishonesty there. It's nice to hear at least their accusations on the first-hand basis. But they also just gave him the National Security Council minutes. So they have in there direct quotes from the minutes, from the note takers, from the meetings, where Rumsfeld is saying, and Bush is agreeing, especially the two of them, that, look, man, if we get bin Laden, that's not victory. And if we fail to get bin Laden, that's not failure. And this war is a big, broad, wide, giant thing. And we got to make sure the American people recognize. Rumsfeld says, maybe we should start bombing Baghdad right now, just so the American people understand. This war is not to be isolated to Tora Bora in Nangarhar province, getting those that got us. That's not what it is. It's everything we want to do from now on. It's Paul Wolfowitz's entire agenda for greater Israel and whatever you got. Now we're going to do whatever we want. And we're going to use, this, travesty and tragedy as an excuse to do it. And, lately I've been trying to give credit to the 9/11 truthers, that as much of a distraction as all that was, and as bad as most of that their reasoning has been, that ultimately you got to hand it to them. George Bush and Dick Cheney might as well have done it. What difference at this point does it make, as Hillary Clinton would say, whether W. Bush actually did 9/11 himself, which I'm not saying that he did, but I'm just saying he killed 1 million people in their name. He exploited the grief and the fear of those survivors and the rest of the country in order to get away with attacking a bunch of people who never done anything to us at all, who didn't threaten us in any way at all. And then, as I document in the book, starting with W. Bush and then continuing through Obama and through this to this day, it took the side of Al-Qaeda in Libya, Syria, and Yemen. And in Syria and Yemen to this day, America, through the Turks, backs Al-Qaeda in the Idlib province in Syria and backs Al-Qaeda, which is AKA UAE's militia on the ground in the war in Yemen, fighting against the Houthis. To this day, it's the highest treason. You can't make this stuff up. And so why wouldn't they have done it? Right? If they had had the opportunity to do it themselves, if they could get away with this, they would have, apparently.
Do you think that it relates to, I was watching your videos earlier, and you were talking about in one of your chapters how during the Operation Desert Storm, they were able to get rid of the Vietnam syndrome, right? And they had this, idea that, America's back and, we have the ability to run these quick, effective operations, and we're going to have this, New World Order doctrine about how we're going to run, NATO's, bidding or the Security Council's, decisions, and we're going to enforce them all. Do you think that getting rid of that Vietnam syndrome early on in Desert Storm helped us to be able to parlay the tragedy of 9/11 into, the broader, more recent war on terror?
Yeah. And I think that this is part of their excuse for letting bin Laden escape too, was, well, we just want to keep it light and fast. In fact, some of them would invoke the kind of lessons that I'm talking about in the book, that they saw that bin Laden was trying to get us to repeat the Russians' mistake. This is something that Rumsfeld, I think, specifically invoked, that we don't want to get bogged down like the Russians here. That's what they're trying to get us to do. And we're smarter than that. So we want to stay light and fast and air power. But then, come on, how light and fast are we talking when you send in Delta Force Team B, but you pull out Team A when they get there? Like, we can't even have 2 teams of Delta Force guys? That's really light and fast.
As compared to all the people we sent there in the first place, right?
Yeah, exactly.
We got 20 years.
Yeah. I mean, and even in December 01, we got Rangers in Bagram Air Base. We got Green Berets up in Mazar-i Sharif, and we got more Rangers and Marines down in Kandahar province. And we got Delta Force and CIA paramilitaries at Tora Bora begging for reinforcements and being told no for weeks. And that's the thing of it. When, I rely heavily on these books, Jawbreaker by Gary Bernson and Kill Bin Laden by Thomas Greer. And that's the CIA commander on scene and the Delta Force commander on scene during this.
No, what that's Dalton Fury's alias? Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so that's Thomas Greer, is AKA Dalton Fury. And people can watch him on 60 Minutes talking about all this too. But basically, these guys say over and over again, they're beating you over the head with it. They go, we just couldn't understand why they wouldn't give us the reinforcements that we needed. And it's like, come on. Yeah, we did too understand. You see what's going on there. They had to make a show of like, hey, we did drop some bombs. We took the risk that we might have got bin Laden. We had a demonstration, but they clearly were not trying to devote whatever was necessary to getting the guilty. They just weren't. And, just to belabor the point a little bit, why couldn't our troops have just followed them into Pakistan? Let's say our guys are so busy invading Somalia right now that we can't spare anyone else to follow bin Laden into Pakistan. Fine, why not send the Delta Force guys that you have? Why not let them give chase? And the way they always talk about this, almost always, and I'm sure you've all heard this, your audience has heard this a million times, well, they slipped across the border into Pakistan. And then you're just supposed to make up the rest of the story yourself. You're just supposed to have to say to yourself, well, I guess I couldn't follow them into Pakistan.
Johnson, they got away.
Yeah, like, there must be like a big waterfall or something that,
he disappeared behind or something.
Yeah. They, I always thought of like, and I asked my mom, because my mom loved old movies, and I was trying to get her to think of a good example of this so I could cite it specifically. And it wasn't Smokey and the Bandit. I don't know what the hell it was, but there's some scene from some old movie or some old TV show, which I thought was a cliche, like had happened a lot of times. Usually people seem to know what I'm talking about, but I can't find any examples of it. But anyway, it's when the bank robber successfully crosses the county line or the state line, and the sheriff has to come to a screeching halt, and he gets out of the car and he throws his hat on the ground and stomps on it and goes, something like that. Or, another great analogy is they jumped into hyperspace. And I'm sorry, my lord, they could be on the other side of the galaxy by now. I don't know what to tell you. They got away.
It's like Han Solo escaping stormtroopers from Tatooine.
Yeah, exactly. But so in this case, though, what are we talking about? We're talking about our elite stormtroopers chasing after some sand people in flip-flops on the ground. And they're on their way where? They didn't cross the border into Russia or China. Where, listen, Henry, if you said to me, but Scott, they crossed into Russia. We can't send our troops across the border into Russia. I would say to you, Henry, you make a great point. But that's not what happened here. They went to Pakistan. And Pakistan's a friendly country. And America, the only reason that they backed the Taliban is because America told them to in the Bill Clinton years. And after September 11th, the Deputy Secretary of State, Dick Armitage, called Pervez Musharraf, the dictator, the military dictator of Pakistan, and said, you're going to do everything we say, or we're going to reduce your country to the Stone Age. In other words, we will use H-bombs on you. You now are in our service. And Pervez Musharraf said, of course, sire, what would you have us do, my lord? And completely put Pakistan in the service of the United States government, especially now. You want to say they started backing the Afghan Taliban against us in 2004? Fine. But that's not what we're talking about here. And Robert Greene writes in his book, again, that they were completely cooperative in every way with his attempt to set up deconfliction to prevent friendly fire. So in other words, they might as well have crossed from Louisiana into Texas. And okay, so fine, the state troopers can't follow them, but the FBI can. The Delta Force sure as hell can. Makes no difference. And again, their excuses are so shoddy. And I can hear, I had forgotten what you say there, quoting Michael Scheuer. I could imagine him saying that. I could maybe even imagine.
I was paraphrasing him, but he said something along the lines, it's all lawyers and stuff like that. He didn't contribute it to malice.
And, there may be something to that, but look, how come Bush and Cheney and Rumsfeld and Tenet didn't override those lawyers and say we're doing it anyway? I mean, these are guys who tortured people to death. These are guys who started wars against countries that didn't attack us whatsoever. At the same time, they let bin Laden go. They're sending the Delta Force to Somalia to hunt a couple guys on the FBI's wanted list from the Cole attack and the embassy attack. So they weren't worried about. They have a declaration of war against Somalia. They have authorization for that, or they do whatever they want. And Gareth Porter one time did an interview with an Army colonel, I guess, who explained, like, no, man, we were really worried about stirring up some of the local tribal people in Pakistan there. Well, I just don't believe that they were worried about that. What the hell do they care? If some local Pakistani sheep herders, I care, but what the hell do they care? If some local Pakistani sheep herders want to throw themselves between the Delta Force and Osama bin Laden. Bad call, brother. We're here hunting a 6.5-foot Arab. You stay the hell out of our way and we won't have a problem. This is the American military we're talking about here. These guys are bullies par excellence. They're not going to not go after their top quarry that you could possibly imagine because of some local Pakistani tribesmen, when nobody thought the plan was to stay in Pakistan. Nobody was saying that, because these stirred up Pakistani tribesmen are going to be a real problem for us in the future. They weren't going to be occupying Western Pakistan. That was never the plan. We're talking about hot pursuit here. That's all. And the fact that, and by the way, in the New York Times last week, they had one where, what happened was bin Laden, he melted across the border. Usually he slips across the border. I guess this guy, he's made of butter. He's very slippery and melty, and he just, And the guy's walking on, he's on horseback or on foot, walking across.
Can you imagine Donald Rumsfeld saying, "We cannot violate the indigenous people there. They have been unmolested for centuries. We can't do that."
Right, yeah. Like it'd be breaking the fourth wall on some Amazonian tribe, that is isolated from the rest of humanity. Oh, we don't want to show them technology, or,